planet Cherylin had always seemed like a distant dream to Ethan Reed. When he first saw it from the observation deck of the Vanguard Explorer, he couldn't help but be struck by its beauty. The thick green atmosphere shimmered under the light of its twin suns, casting long shadows over the endless forests and rivers below. It was a world untouched by the heavy hand of industrialization, a pristine oasis in the vast reaches of space. He had come here along with his team to explore, to learn, and to bridge the gap between two civilizations that had lived light years apart. But nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen that day by the river. It was his third week on the planet, and Ethan was venturing into the heart of the Varelian territory. The Varelians, one of the more prominent native tribes, had cautiously welcomed the humans to their world. With tall, slender figures and skin that shimmered faintly in the sun with a soft golden hue, they seemed almost ethereal. Their large, almond-shaped eyes hinted at a deeper understanding of the world, one built on their planet's rhythm, rather than the technology Ethan had always relied on. The Varelians were wary but curious, their connection to the land palpable. Ethan respected that. He had spent the last few days trying to earn their trust, always moving slowly, observing their customs, speaking only when spoken to. They had accepted his presence for the most part, though he could sense the tension when he walked too close to their sacred sites or touched something that carried spiritual significance. On this particular afternoon, the air was thick with humidity as Ethan wandered along the banks of the Tyrolean River, a powerful current that twisted and roared through the dense forests like a living thing. The river was the lifeblood of the Varelian people, a source of sustenance and spiritual connection, but also a source of great danger. The stories he'd heard about its strength and unpredictability were not exaggerations. Ethan crouched down at the water's edge, taking samples of the riverbed soil for analysis. He was lost in his work, cataloging the samples in his digital log when a sudden, high-pitched cry pierced the air. He looked up, eyes scanning the riverbank, his heart pounding in his chest. There, barely 50 meters away, a figure was thrashing in the water, struggling against the swift current. The figure was small, delicate, and unmistakably Varelian. It took Ethan only a moment to react. Without a second thought, he sprinted toward the riverbank, his mind racing. The girl was barely managing to keep her head above water, her arms flailing, her golden hair plastered her face as she was pulled downstream by the powerful current. "Hold on," Ethan shouted, though he wasn't sure she could hear him over the roar of the river. She was losing strength fast, her head dipping beneath the surface more and more frequently. Ethan knew he had no time to waste. Stripping off his jacket and boots, he plunged into the icy water, the shock of the cold momentarily stealing his breath. The current was stronger than he'd expected, and it fought against him, trying to pull him downstream. But years of training and countless expeditions had honed his body, and he pushed through the resistance, eyes fixed on the struggling figure ahead. The water was relentless, swirling and dragging him back with every stroke. But Ethan was determined. His arms burned as he pushed forward and his legs kicked furiously against the river's pull. With a final surge of energy, he reached the girl just as she slipped beneath the surface. Grabbing her wrist, he pulled her up, her small frame limp in his grasp. She coughed and sputtered, gasping for air as she clung to him in desperation. He could feel the panic in her trembling body as her fingers dug into his arm. "I got you," he said, though his own voice was strained with effort. "You're going to be okay." The hardest part was still ahead of them. With one arm wrapped securely around her, Ethan struggled to swim back to the riverbank. The current was unyielding, but he refused to let it take them. His muscles screamed in protest, but inch by inch they moved closer to the shore. He could see the overhanging branches of a nearby tree, his lifeline to safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his feet touched solid ground. With a surge of adrenaline, Ethan pushed forward, dragging both himself and the girl onto the riverbank. They collapsed in a heap on the damp earth, both gasping for breath. But for a long moment, the only sound was the rush of the river and their ragged breathing. Ethan lay on his back, chest heaving as he stared up at the sky. The twin suns were beginning to set, casting the forest in hues of gold and crimson. He turned his head to look at the girl beside him. She was young, older than 18, with large, terrified eyes that reflected the colors of the sky. Her skin, which shimmered with the faint golden hue of her people, was pale from the cold, and her lips were trembling. Ethan could see the exhaustion in her face, but she was alive. She sat up slowly, still catching her breath, and turned to look at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, she said, "Thank you." Her words, though soft, carried an immense weight. Ethan smiled weakly and sat up, wincing as his sore muscles protested. "You're welcome," he said, his voice hoarse from the effort. Just then, a group of Varelians emerged from the trees, their faces stricken with fear and concern. They had clearly seen the incident and had rushed to the river. At the front of the group was a tall figure, his presence commanding. Ethan recognized him immediately, Chief Moran, the leader of the Varelians. The chief's eyes darted between Ethan and the girl, who was now standing shakily. His gaze softened when he saw her safe, but there was still a seriousness in his expression. The Varelians gathered around the girl, speaking in their melodic language, voices tinged with relief. Ka-Lara, Ethan heard one of them say. Her name was Ka-Lara. Chief Moran approached Ethan, his expression unreadable. Ethan stood, still soaked from the river, and braced himself for the leader's response. Would they be angry? Would they see his interference as an overstep? To his surprise, the chief placed a hand on his chest and bowed his head slightly. "And you saved my daughter," Moran said, his voice low and steady. "You have done more than you know." Ethan blinked in surprise. He had expected gratitude, perhaps, but not like this. The tribe's eyes were on him, and he could feel the weight of their attention. I couldn't let her drown," he said simply, unsure of how to respond. Moran stepped closer, his deep-set eyes meeting Ethan's. "In our culture," he said, "to save a life is not merely a kind act. It is an honor of the highest order. You have bound yourself to her in ways you cannot yet understand." Ethan frowned, confusion creeping into his mind. "Bound," he repeated. The chief nodded gravely. "The bind of life," he explained. "It is an ancient bond, one of loyalty and devotion. You saved her life, and in doing so, you have forged a connection that cannot be broken." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. In the world, saving someone's life was an act of bravery, yes, but it didn't carry the kind of lifelong weight Moran seemed to be describing. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to help." Moran smiled, though it was a solemn smile filled with the wisdom of generations. "Intent matters little. The bond exists now. You are forever connected to Ka-Lara." The words hung heavy in the air, and Ethan struggled to grasp their full meaning. Ka-Lara, still weak but standing with the help of her people, looked at him with wide, unreadable eyes. There was no fear in them now, only something deep and profound that Ethan couldn't quite place. "Come," Moran said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "we'll speak more of this, and you have earned a place of honor among us." Ethan nodded, though his mind raced. He followed the tribe as they led him and Ka-Lara back to their village. What had difficult, significant had just happened settling over him like a heavy mantle. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had spiraled into something far greater, something that would change his life forever. As the village came into view, the setting suns casting long shadows across the land, Ethan couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of a journey he had never expected to take. A journey bound by honor, by duty, and perhaps something more. The Varelian village was unlike anything Ethan had seen before. Nestled deep within the emerald canopy of the forest, the home seemed to grow organically from the trees themselves, seamlessly integrated into the natural world around them. Long, winding bridges of woven vines connected the elevated structures, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers and the faint hum of life. It was a world in perfect harmony with nature, a far cry from the sterile, manufactured environments of human cities. As Ethan followed Chief Moran and the others into the village, he could feel the eyes of the Varelians on him. They watched him with a mixture of curiosity and reverence, whispering among themselves in their melodic language, and he wasn't sure if it was his role as an outsider or the life he had saved that was drawing their attention. Perhaps it was both. Ka-Lara, still recovering from her ordeal, walked beside her father. Though visibly exhausted, she carried herself with a quiet dignity. The river had not broken her spirit, but it had shaken something deep inside her, and Ethan could sense the weight of her emotions. She glanced at him occasionally, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something deeper. Perhaps a connection she wasn't yet able to fully articulate. As they reached the heart of the village, Moran stopped and gestured for Ethan to follow him to a large, intricately carved platform that served as the tribe's gathering space. The carvings depicted swirling images of water, trees, and celestial bodies representing the elements the Varelians revered. Moran turned to face his people, raising his hands in a gesture of authority. "Today," the chief began, his voice resonating through the village, "we honor a great act of bravery. This man, Ethan of Earth, has saved the life of my daughter, Ka-Lara. In doing so, he has earned the highest honor among our people. He is bound to us now by the bind of life." At these words, the crowd murmured, and Ethan felt a surge of unease. The concept of the bind of life still felt foreign to him, an intangible responsibility he hadn't intended to take on. But the Varelians took it very seriously. He could see it in their eyes, hear it in the reverence of their voices. Whatever this bond was, it was sacred to them. Moran's gaze softened as he turned back to Ethan. "You may not yet understand the full weight of this bond," the chief said, "but in time you will. So for now, know that you are one of us. You have saved a life, and in our eyes, that makes you family." Family. The word struck Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. He had left his own family behind on Earth, thousands of light years away. His parents, his siblings, they were distant memories now, their faces blurred by the passage of time and the vastness of space. So he hadn't felt the warmth of family in years, and yet here, on a planet so far from his own, a new family was being offered to him, one he hadn't asked for, but one that was being given nonetheless. Moran stepped aside and Kalara approached Ethan, her steps slow but purposeful. She stood before him, her hands clasped together, her expression soft and contemplative. She seemed to be studying him, as if searching for the right words to express what she was feeling. "You saved my life," she said quietly, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I will never forget that." Ethan nodded, unsure of what to say. The sincerity in her words touched him, but he still struggled to grasp the depth of the bond they now shared. "I'm just glad you're okay," he replied, his voice low. Anyone would have done the same. Kalara's gaze flickered, and for a moment, a faint smile crossed her lips. "Not anyone," she said. "Not many would have risked their life for someone they do not know." Ethan looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. He had acted on instinct, nothing more. But to the Varelians, that instinct had meant everything. He hadn't realized that saving her would tie him to her in such a profound way. The days that followed were quiet, but not without significance. Ethan found himself spending more time among the Varelians, learning their customs, their ways of life. Kalara was often nearby, sometimes watching him from a distance, other times approaching him with quiet questions or observations. She seemed drawn to him, though she never said it outright. One afternoon, as they sat together beneath a massive tree at the edge of the village, Kalara began to speak more openly about her people and their beliefs. She explained the significance of the bind of life, how it was more than just an obligation of gratitude, it was a spiritual bond that tied two souls together. To save a life was to take on a lifelong duty of loyalty, not as a burden, but as a burden. The Varelians believed that such a bond transcended mere thanks. It was a connection that would last for the rest of their lives. Ethan listened quietly, absorbing the weight of her words. "So this bond," he began, his voice thoughtful, "it's not just about me saving you. It's about us being connected from now on?" Kalara nodded. "Yes, it's not something you can break. Once the bond is formed, it remains. You saved my life, Ethan, and that means that you are a part of my life now forever." He wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, it seemed like an incredible responsibility when he hadn't asked for. But on the other hand, there was something undeniably comforting about the idea of being connected to someone so deeply, especially in a world where he often felt so alone. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and Kalara grew closer. Their conversations, once formal and cautious, became more relaxed, more intimate. Ethan found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. She was intelligent, kind, and wise beyond her years. Her deep connection to her people and their traditions fascinated him, and she had a way of seeing the world that made him question his own assumptions. One evening, as they sat by the river, this time a safe distance from the rushing current, Kalara shared more of her past. She told him about the day she had nearly drowned as a child, the event that had given her a lifelong fear of the water. It had been a simple mistake, a moment of carelessness, but it had left a deep scar on her psyche. Since that day, she had avoided the river, never daring to go near it, let alone swim in it. "The water terrifies me," she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "It's why I panicked that day. I should have known better than to get so close, but I let my curiosity get the better of me." Ethan looked at her, his heart aching with empathy. He understood fear. He had faced his own share of it over the years. But the fear she described was different, deeper, rooted in a childhood trauma that had never fully healed. "You don't have to be afraid of the water," he said softly. "I can help you." Kalara's eyes met his, and for a moment she seemed surprised by his offer. "Help me." Ethan nodded. "I can teach you how to swim. You don't have to be afraid of it anymore." She hesitated, her gaze shifting to the river's edge. The water, calm in this part of the forest, reflected the twilight sky in hues of pink and gold. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Every time I get close, I feel like I'm drowning again." Ethan reached out and gently placed a hand on her arm, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "You won't drown. I'll be there with you the whole time. We'll take it slow, one step at a time." For a long moment, Kalara said nothing, her eyes locked on the water. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right," she agreed, though her voice was tinged with apprehension. "But we'll go slow." The next few days became a quiet journey of healing. Each morning, Ethan and Kalara would return to the river, starting small, just standing by the water's edge, feeling the coolness of the air, and listening to the gentle lapping of the current. At first, Kalara was tense, her body rigid with fear, but Ethan was patient. He never pushed her, never forced her to do more than she was ready for. Gradually, she grew more comfortable. She began to step into the shallow waters, her feet sinking into the soft sand beneath. At first she trembled, her breath quickening with anxiety, but Ethan was always there, holding her hand, grounding her. "You're safe," he would whisper whenever her fear threatened to take over. "I'm right here." And slowly, ever so slowly, Kalara began to trust the water again. One afternoon, after weeks of careful progress, Kalara took her first strokes. They were shaky and uncertain, but they were hers. Ethan watched with a mixture of pride and relief. as she moved through the water, her fear still present but no longer controlling her. When she surfaced, a small, triumphant smile tugged at her lips. "I did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Ethan smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "You did." They looked into each other's souls and came closer, having their first kiss there. Their bond deepened in those moments by the river, not just because of the bind of life, but because they were healing together. Ethan realized that in helping her face her fear, he was finding something he hadn't known he needed: a connection, a purpose. Kalara wasn't just a life he had saved, she was becoming something more, someone who mattered to him in ways that went beyond gratitude or duty. As time passed, Ethan became more integrated into Varelian life. He helped the tribe with their daily tasks, learned their language, and began to understand the rhythms of their existence. They, in turn, grew to trust him more, accepting him as one of their own. He was no longer just an outsider, he was part of their world now, bound by the bond he had forged with Kalara. And with each passing day, Ethan found himself looking forward to his time with her. Their conversations became longer, more personal. She would ask him about Earth, about the people there, about the stars he had traveled through to reach Saralin, and Ethan in turn would listen to her stories of her ancestors, of the great spirits that watched over her people, of the legends that had shaped her world. One evening, as the two sat by the fire outside Kalara's family home, she turned to him, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you ever miss your world?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought about Earth in a long time, not since the day he had plunged into the river to save her. His life on Earth felt distant, like a dream he had once lived but could no longer fully remember. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not as much as I thought I would." Kalara smiled faintly. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "I don't think I could have faced the river without you." Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. "I'm glad I'm here too," he replied, his voice just as soft. And in that moment, as the night wrapped around them like a comforting blanket, Ethan realized that Shrillin was no longer just a distant planet he had come to explore. It was becoming home. And Kalarashi was becoming something far more important. The days on Tirolin were long, their twin suns casting an amber glow over the forests and rivers for hours before dipping below the horizon. Time moved differently here in the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of nature. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, and yet every moment was sharp, filled with meaning. Ethan, the planet had transformed from an expedition destination into something far deeper, a place where he had discovered parts of himself he hadn't even known were missing. The Varelians had come to accept him as one of their own. His once awkward and tentative steps through their village had become confident, familiar. He knew the paths between the trees, the sounds of the birds that nested in the towering branches, the way the river's current whispered its secrets. But more importantly, he had come to understand the people, their customs, their beliefs, their deep connection to their planet. And Kalara. There was something about Kalara that had drawn Ethan in from the moment he saved her. Perhaps it had been the way she looked at him with those wide, otherworldly eyes, or the way she held herself with such quiet strength. But over time, it became something more, a connection that went beyond the bind of life, beyond duty or tradition. It was something he hadn't expected to find so far from home. He found himself thinking of her constantly, wondering what she was doing when she wasn't with him, looking for reasons to spend time in her presence. And as their bond grew, so did his feelings. What had once been a simple gratitude for her life saved had deepened into a longing to share every part of his world with her, and to become part of hers in a way that transcended even the Varelian customs. Ethan could no longer deny it. He was in love with Kalara. One evening, as the twin suns dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village, Ethan found himself walking along the riverbank, the same river where he had first saved Kalara. The water glistened with the hues of dusk, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and blooming flowers. His thoughts were heavy, conflicted. The time was approaching when he would have to make a choice. The original mission, his expedition to Chirolin, was nearing its end. Communication with the Vanguard explorer had been less frequent recently, but he knew the day was coming when they would call him back. He would have to decide: return to Earth, to the life he had once known, or remain here in this strange yet beautiful world where he had found something he never imagined: love. But staying wasn't as simple as it seemed. The bind of life tied him to Kalara in ways he couldn't fully comprehend, but his feelings for her went beyond the bond. He loved her, not because he had saved her life, but because she was strong, kind, wise, and so deeply connected to her world. Her quiet confidence, her gentle spirit, her curiosity about his world had all captivated him, and he knew deep down that his future wasn't on Earth anymore. His future was with her. He had to speak to her, had to find a way to tell her what was weighing on his heart. But how? How could he explain to her that he wanted to spend the rest of his life here with her, when his own world's customs were so different from hers. As Ethan stood by the river, lost in thought, he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Kalara approaching, her lithe form moving gracefully through the trees. She wore a simple dress woven from the fibers of the forest, and her hair, usually loose, was braided with delicate flowers. She smiled when she saw him, though her eyes held a hint of curiosity. "You come here often," she said, her voice soft but warm. "Is the river still a place of reflection for you?" Ethan smiled in return, though it was tinged with the weight of what he had been thinking. "I guess it is," he admitted. "This river, it's where everything changed for me." Kalara nodded, stepping closer until she stood beside him. She looked out over the water, her expression thoughtful. "It changed for me too. That day I thought I would die. But you saved me." The words hung in the air between them, a reminder of the bond they shared, the one that had brought them together. But now, standing here, it felt like more than just the bind of life. It felt like something more profound, something that had grown between them in the time since. "I didn't save you because of the bond," Ethan said quietly, looking down at the ground. "I didn't even know what it meant back then." Kalara turned to him, her brow furrowed slightly. "I know, but that doesn't change the fact that you did save me." Ethan met her gaze, his heart racing. He had rehearsed this moment in his head so many times, yet now that it was here, he found the words harder to say than he'd imagined. "And I saved you because I had to," he continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "because I couldn't bear the thought of losing someone like you, even if I didn't know you yet. And now that I do know you, I can't imagine my life without you." Kalara's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in surprise. She seemed to be searching his face, trying to understand the depth of his words. "Ethan," she began, but he held up a hand, gently silencing her. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, stepping closer to her, "about what this bond means, about what it means for me to be here with you on Cerulean. And I've realized something." Kalara tilted her head, her expression softening. "What is it?" Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I don't want to leave. My mission, it's supposed to end soon. The others will be expecting me to return to Earth. But I don't want to go back. I want to stay here, with you." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. The only sound was the gentle ripple of the river behind them. "Kalara," Ethan continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I love you. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to find love here on this planet, but I have, and it's you. I want to be with you, not because of the bind of life, but because of how I feel. I love you, Kalara, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, carved wooden ring he had fashioned over the past few weeks. It was simple, made from the wood of a tree sacred to the Varelians, and adorned with a delicate pattern that represented the rivers and stars they both cherished. It wasn't the kind of elaborate engagement ring a human would offer, but it was made with the traditions and beliefs of her people in mind. Kalara's eyes widened as she stared at the ring, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted it to her lips. Tears welled in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. For a long moment she was silent. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, fear creeping in that perhaps he had misunderstood her feelings. Then finally she spoke, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "Ethan, I never thought." She trailed off, her eyes meeting his, filled with a mixture of wonder and love. "I never thought I could find someone like you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Someone who understands me, who sees me for who I am, and still chooses to love me." She stepped closer, taking his hands in hers, her touch warm and comforting. "I love you too, Ethan. I think I've loved you from the moment you saved me, though I didn't fully understand it then. I thought it was just the bind of life, but now I know it's more. It's you. It's us." Ethan felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him. His heart swelled as he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady despite the overwhelming emotions coursing through him. Kalara looked at the ring, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. She smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "And so are you." They stood there for a moment, their hands intertwined, the weight of their words settling over them like a gentle breeze. The river flowed behind them, a symbol of their journey together from the day Ethan had saved her life to this moment, where they were bound by something far stronger than duty. The news of their engagement spread through the village like wildfire. The Varelians had long accepted Ethan as one of their own, but his proposal to Kalara brought forth a celebration unlike any other. The entire village gathered to honor their union, for it was not just the joining of two individuals, but a symbol of the bridge that had formed between two worlds. The night of the celebration was filled with music and laughter. The Varelians adorned themselves in their finest garments woven from the fibers of the forest and decorated with vibrant natural pigments. Fires were lit in the center of the village, their warm glow casting flickering shadows on the trees. Kalara stood beside Ethan, her hand in his, as they faced the tribe. Chief Moran, her father, stood before them, his expression filled with pride and approval. He placed his hands on both their shoulders. his voice steady and resonant as he spoke the ancient words of union in the Varelian tongue. "This union," Moran said, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd, "is a union of two souls bound not by tradition or duty, but by love. A love that transcends the differences between our people, between our worlds. Tonight we celebrate the bond that has been forged between Ethan and Kaylara, a bond that will guide us all into a future of unity and peace." The tribe cheered, their voices rising in unison, filling the night air with their joyous celebration. Ethan looked at Kaylara, his heart full to bursting. She smiled at him, her eyes glowing with happiness and love. As the night wore on, Ethan and Kaylara danced together beneath the twin moons of Cherylin, the stars above watching over them. The firelight danced in her golden hair, and her laughter filled the air, a sound that made his heart soar. In that moment, Ethan knew he had made the right choice. His future was here with her on this planet that had once seemed so distant and strange. Together they would forge a new path, one where two worlds could come together in love and understanding. And as they danced beneath the stars, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, of peace. He was no longer just an explorer from Earth. He was a part of Cherylin now, and Kaylara was his future. They were bound by more than the bind of life. They were bound by love. The night was long, filled with celebration, but as the stars began to fade and the first light of dawn touched the sky, Ethan and Kaylara stood at the edge of the village, looking out over the vast forests of Cherylin. Hand in hand, they stood in silence, watching the world wake around them. "I never thought I'd find a home so far from where I was born," Ethan said softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Kaylara squeezed his hand gently. "You have a home here now, with me." Ethan turned to her, his heart swelling with love. "I know, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." They kissed, the first rays of sunlight warming their skin, a promise of the life they would build together. And as the day began, they stepped into their new future, one filled with love, with hope, and with the knowledge that their union had the power to bridge not just their lives, but the lives of two entire worlds. The air on Cherylin was always rich, thick with the scent of blooming flowers, moist earth, and the hum of a world that pulsed with life. The twin suns filtered through the dense canopy of ancient trees, casting warm golden light on the village below. To Ethan, the vibrant hues and sounds of the planet had become familiar, comforting. Even the foreignness had worn away, replaced by a deep, abiding connection to the land and its people. Months had passed since his proposal to Kaylara, and in that time Ethan had fully settled into his new life. The wedding had been a grand affair, celebrated not only by the Varelian people, but by the few human colleagues who had remained on Cherylin Swell. His bond with Kaylara had grown stronger with each passing day, the love they shared deepening in ways that surprised even him. They had begun their life together as husband and wife, and each moment with her was a discovery, a shared experience that tied him ever closer to this world that had once felt so distant. But as Ethan stood at the edge of the village, gazing out over the vast expanse of forest that stretched toward the horizon, he knew that their journey was far from over. Cherylin was changing, and so was the delicate relationship between the Varelians and the humans who had come to explore their planet. The mission that had brought Ethan here was nearing its official conclusion. The scientific team aboard the Vanguard Explorer was preparing to depart soon. Their research complete, negotiations between Earth and the Varelians were progressing, but they were fraught with challenges. The humans had arrived as explorers, but now there was talk of further collaboration, trade, cultural exchange, even settlement. The Varelians were cautious, protective of their world, their ways of life, and rightly so. And Ethan, who had become a bridge between these two worlds, found himself caught in the middle. He felt Kayara's presence before he saw her. She approached him quietly. As was her way, her steps light on the soft earth. She reached his side and slipped her hand into his, her touch warm and reassuring. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the suns rise higher in the sky. "You've been thinking," she said softly, her voice a gentle caress. Ethan nodded, squeezing her hand. "I've been thinking a lot." She turned to face him, her golden eyes searching his face. "About the humans?" "About everything," he admitted. "About what comes next. The Vanguard Explorer will be leaving soon. They're making preparations. And Earth will want more from Cherylin. I know it. They'll want to come here, to learn more, to explore more, maybe even to stay." Kayara's expression was thoughtful, her brow furrowing slightly. "And you worry about what that means for us." "For us, for your people, for this planet," Ethan said. "Cherylin is special. It's beautiful, untouched in so many ways. The humans, we have a way of changing things, sometimes for the better, but sometimes not." Kaylara nodded, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. "I understand your fears. My people share them. We've lived in balance with our world for so long. The idea of more humans coming here, of new settlements, new technologies, it could disrupt that balance." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want to see Cherylin become another Earth. But I also know that humans and Varelians could learn so much from each other. There's potential for something great here if we're careful." Kalara was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan could see the weight of his words settling over her. She had always been the more pragmatic of the two, able to see both sides of any situation. Her wisdom, passed down through generations of Varelian traditions, gave her a unique perspective that Ethan had come to admire. Perhaps, she said slowly, it's not about stopping the change, but about guiding it. Your people, the humans, they will come. It is inevitable. But if we work together, if we make sure that the Varelian ways are respected, that our connection to the land is preserved, then maybe we can find a way for both our worlds to coexist. Ethan looked at her, a sense of awe filling him. She was right, of course. She always seemed to find the balance in things. You think it's possible for humans and Varelians to live together? Kalara smiled, her eyes softening. I think anything is possible if there is love, respect, and understanding. Look at us, Ethan. We come from different worlds, yet we have found a way to love each other, to build a life together. If we can do it, why can't our people? Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. You always know just what to say. She leaned in and kissed his cheek, her lips soft against his skin. You inspire me. The next few weeks were filled with preparations. Ethan knew that his role as a bridge between the two worlds would be vital in the coming months. He met with Chief Moran and the other Varelian elders, discussing the potential impact of further human interaction with their people. The Varelians were cautious, but they were not opposed to the idea of cooperation. They had seen the benefits of human knowledge and technology, but they also understood the need to protect their way of life. Kalara, too, played a significant role in these discussions. Her voice, calm and wise, carried weight among the elders, and her bond with Ethan was seen as a symbol of hope. Together, they represented what could be a future where two species so different yet so alike in their capacity for love and understanding could thrive side by side. But not all the Varelians were in agreement. Some feared that the humans would bring ruin to their world, that they would strip the land of its resources, pollute its rivers, and disrupt the balance that had sustained their people for millennia. Then Ethan understood their concerns, for he had seen firsthand what humanity was capable of, both its brilliance and its destructiveness. The day of the final negotiation with the humans arrived sooner than Ethan expected. Representatives from Earth had arrived, setting up a temporary outpost just outside the village where they would meet with the Varelian Council. Ethan had been asked to attend, not just as a translator, but as an advisor, someone who could speak to both sides with understanding and respect. The meeting took place in a large, open space in the center of the village. The Varelian elders, including Chief Moran, sat in a semicircle, their expressions solemn but open. Across from them sat the human representatives, diplomats, scientists, and a few high-ranking officials sent from Earth. Ethan sat between them, feeling the weight of the responsibility that had been placed on his shoulders. The discussions were long and tense as both sides worked to find common ground. The humans wanted access to Cyrillon's resources, its minerals, its flora, its unique ecosystems. But the Varelians were firm in their stance: no exploitation of the land. They would allow limited access for scientific study and cultural exchange, but any larger-scale settlement or resource extraction was out of the question. At one point, the human diplomat, a woman named Dr. Marion Caldwell, who had been leading the negotiations, turned to Ethan with a question that struck the heart of the matter. Ethan, she said, her voice calm but pointed, you've lived among the Varelians. You understand both our worlds. Do you truly believe that coexistence is possible? Can we as humans integrate with this world without destroying what makes it special? Ethan hesitated, feeling the eyes of both the humans and the Varelians on him. He looked at Kalara, who sat beside her father, her gaze steady and filled with trust. She believed in him, believed in their shared vision of a future where both their worlds could coexist, and in that moment, Ethan knew what he had to say. I do believe it's possible, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, but only if we approach this with respect and humility. Cyrillon isn't just a planet to be mined or studied. It's a living world with its own balance, its own rhythms. The Varelians understand this balance better than we do. If we want to be a part of this world, we have to learn from them, not impose our ways on them. The room fell silent, and for a moment Ethan feared that his words had fallen on deaf ears. But then Dr. Caldwell nodded, her expression thoughtful. I see your point, she said. We must tread lightly or not at all. Chief Moran spoke then, his deep voice resonating with authority. We are not opposed to learning from each other, but we will not allow our world to be destroyed. If there is to be cooperation, it must be built on trust and respect. That is our way. The negotiations continued, but Ethan could feel the shift. Both sides had begun to understand that this wasn't just about trade or resources, it was about building a future together, one where both species could thrive. By the end of the day, an agreement had been reached. The humans would be allowed to establish small research outposts, but only under Varelian supervision, and any plans for larger settlements would have to be approved by the Varelian Council. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That night, as the village celebrated the success of the negotiations, Ethan and Kalara found themselves once again by the river, their favorite place. So the stars above twinkled like diamonds scattered across the night sky, and the air was cool and refreshing. Ethan sat beside Kalara, his arm wrapped around her shoulders as they watched the water flow gently by. For a long time, neither of them spoke, content to simply be in each other's presence. Finally, Kalara broke the silence. "You did well today." Ethan smiled, though his thoughts were still heavy. "I just hope we've made the right choice. There's still so much that could go wrong." Kalara turned to him, her golden eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "There is always risk and change, but I believe in you. I believe in us. Together we can guide this future." Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with love. She was right, of course. They had come this far, two people from different worlds, bound together not just by the bind of life, but by something far deeper. If they could find a way to love and understand each other, then perhaps their people could too. Kalara and Ethan had just experienced one of the most significant days of their lives. The vibrant celebrations in the deep forests of Cerulean quieted, and the villagers, filled with joy and peace, had retreated to their homes. Now, in the gentle silence of the night, the significance of this evening, their first together as husband and wife, seemed to deepen. Ethan stood facing Kalara, gently holding her hands in his. The excitement of the wedding ceremony had given way to a profound calm. It felt as though the world around them had faded, leaving only the two of them, standing in the stillness of the night. The way they looked at each other spoke of a connection that was far deeper than words could express, a bond born from both love and a shared journey. Kalara's golden eyes glowed softly in the moonlight, reflecting a quiet trust. There was a serenity in her expression, and a slight smile graced her lips. She too was feeling the significance of this moment. This was more than just the beginning of a marriage, it was the start of a life intertwined with urgence and worlds. Ethan, sensing the depth of her gaze, spoke softly, his voice filled with emotion. "To be here with you, to share this life with you, it's the greatest honor of my life. I've never been more sure of anything." Kalara's smile grew as she gently squeezed his hand. "We're bound, Ethan. Not just by the bind of life, but by choice. Tonight we take the first step in building the future we've dreamed of. With trust, love, and patience, we can create anything." The simplicity of her words touched Ethan deeply. Her wisdom and quiet strength were among the many things that had drawn him to her. She was not just his partner, she was his anchor in this new world. As they stepped into the small, private room that had been prepared for them, there was no rush. Everything felt natural and hurried. Their movements were gentle, their touches light, as they continued to express the profound emotions they had for one another. Theirs was not just a physical closeness, but a deep emotional and spiritual connection that had grown over the months they'd spent together. Kalara's presence brought Ethan a peace he had never known. He looked at her, brushing a strand of her golden hair away from her face, and spoke softly, "Loving you isn't just a duty. It's a privilege." Her eyes softened as she gazed back at him, her heart full. "And loving you is a gift I never expected. Our bond is more than just between us, it's the connection between two worlds, two lives." As they continued to embrace the night, the bond between them grew stronger, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet understanding and deep love they shared. Their first night was not simply about crossing into married life. It was a sacred moment of trust and mutual respect, the foundation of their future together. Ethan, overwhelmed by the depth of his feelings, gently kissed her forehead, whispering, "We're building something, Arbayam." Kalara closed her eyes, savoring the warmth of his words and touch. "Together we can face whatever comes. This night, this love, it's only the beginning." They spent the rest of the night in each other's company, talking softly, sharing memories and dreams for the future. There was no need for haste. The night, like their love, was timeless. This retelling of their first night focused on the emotional and spiritual connection between Ethan and Kalara. Their shared journey had already tied them together in profound ways, but this night marked this new life, the start of their new life as one. Their love, grounded in mutual trust and respect, had laid the foundation for everything that would follow as they stepped into a future full of hope, love, and unity. The years that followed were not without challenges, but they were filled with growth, with learning, and with love. The Varelians and humans worked together, slowly building a future where both species could thrive. There were moments of tension, of course, misunderstandings, conflicts of interest, but through it all, Ethan and Kalara remained a constant, their bond a symbol of what was possible. So they became parents, welcoming a daughter into the world, a child who carried the legacy of both species, both worlds. She grew up with the knowledge that she was a bridge between two civilizations, a living testament to the love that had brought her parents together. And as Ethan looked out over the ever-changing landscape of Cerulean, his heart full of love for his wife, his child, and the world they had built together, he knew that they had succeeded. They had bridged worlds, and they had done it with love,